Inflation remains higher than forecasted. NTD's Iris Tao has more on what the latest numbers tell us and how President Biden and lawmakers are reacting.
Prices continue to rise in August, dashing hopes that inflation would ease. According to the Consumer Price Index released on Tuesday, overall prices rose 0.1% last month after dropping to zero in July. On an annual basis, prices are up 8.3% compared to last year. The higher than expected numbers were driven by increases in food prices and rent, offsetting the recent decline in gas prices. The Dow plunges more than 1,200 points on Tuesday over inflation fears. Meanwhile, Democrats and the president held a White House celebration Tuesday of the Inflation Reduction Act.
This bill cut costs for families, help reduce inflation at the kitchen table, $1.5 trillion reduction in the deficit. So I don't want to hear it anymore about big spending Democrats. We spend, but we pay.
This administration who still don't get it.
Republicans, however, urge the administration to stop spending and cheering.
They continue to celebrate the tax increases, the amount of spending they're doing, and inflation continues to choke the American people.
And so we have no more votes this afternoon because all of the Democrats have headed to the White House to celebrate this. And I guarantee what we're going to see from this law is higher inflation. We see that today.
Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is facing more pressure to tame inflation as prices remain high. It'll decide whether to impose another supersized interest rate hike next week. And Fed officials have made clear that they aren't going to back off until inflation starts to recede in a meaningful manner. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Next, joining us to discuss the inflation numbers released earlier today, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for Bankrate.com, Mark Hemrick. Mark Hemrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Mark, the CPI was released today, which was higher than expected by a fraction of a percent at 8.3 inflation level. What do you make of it?
Inflation continues to be more persistent and higher than had been expected. And obviously, when we're getting a hot read like this on the year-over-year rate of core inflation, that's disappointing because we had been sort of hoping that we could put this worst episode of inflation behind us. And we may have seen a peak, but it's certainly not leveling off at a substantial pace.
So, Mark, how will this inflation report affect the Fed's tightening agenda? Do you expect them to be more aggressive?
This gives them confidence in the sense that they want to continue to tighten interest rates. And the expectation before the release of the Consumer Price Index had been that we get the third consecutive increase of 0.75% in the benchmark federal funds rate. I know there's some speculation in financial markets that it could be something more than that. I think it would take something else for them to arrive at that conclusion. But we do have a week before that report, before the meeting of the Federal Reserve and their announcement and news conference, as well as their summary of economic projections. But I would expect at this point that the next rate increase will be similar to what we've seen now twice before.
Mark, can the U.S. economy achieve a soft landing, do you think? And what is your overall view on the state of the economy this year?
So a soft landing would be a situation where you bring essentially the expansion in at a lower rate and avoid a recession. The reality is, over the long term, recessions cannot always be avoided. And the fear is the Federal Reserve is doing too much by not only raising interest rates aggressively, as is the expectation through the end of the year, but also reducing its $9 trillion balance sheet in a way that has not been done before. The expansion in the early days of the pandemic was really meant to sort of fix the disconnected behavior of the market for treasuries. And it did that, and it ignited a rally in the stock market and led to very strong economic expansion. But this unwinding of pandemic monetary policy is essentially an experiment. So what I would say is, first of all, the pain associated with inflation is bad enough. If we actually had a sustained and significant contraction in economic activity, that would be another insult to injury in the economy. But I think consumers have already been substantially pressured by this inflation problem, which is why the Fed believes strong medicine is needed.
Very interesting, Mark. We're heading into the holiday shopping season. What's your forecast? What will you be watching for and looking for coming up?
Well, Americans will always celebrate the holidays however they can. It may not be at the level of spending that they would like in the sense of overall gift purchases. And let's remember that the holiday shopping season is the most important season for retailers, but it's not sort of the totality of consumer spending, which has to go for all the things that we're talking about in the consumer price index. But the reality is that consumers have really been focusing on necessities, and to some degree, holiday gifts will be viewed as a necessity, even though at some level they also represent a luxury or a discretionary item. But I think retailers are going to be happy that they believe, unlike last year, the worst of their supply chain disruptions are behind, and they will have sufficient inventories to satisfy that demand. So in that way, this should be a better holiday season, and we won't have the same problems that we had last year.
Mark Hamrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
A 15-week ban on abortions in every state. That's what Senator Lindsay Graham introduced today. Democrats were quick to push back. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
This abortion bill that Senator Graham just introduced today would place a national abortion ban after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Now, there are exceptions, that is, if the mother's life is at risk, or in cases of rape and incest, that is, if those crimes have been officially documented. Senator Graham says the goal of this bill is to make our abortion laws consistent with the rest of the world and to prevent abortions of pain-capable babies.
That if you have to provide anesthesia to keep the baby from feeling pain to help save its life, should we as a nation be aborting babies that can feel excruciating pain from an abortion?
Speaking to a packed room, the senator explained that this bill serves to counter Democrats' national abortion proposal, allowing abortion on demand in every state. Graham calls the Democrats' proposal an extreme one, saying it puts us on par with just 7 other countries, including North Korea and China.
So, Melina, what is the support for this bill looking like?
Well, Senator Graham said he was confident that if Republicans take back the majority, this bill could be brought to the floor and debated on. And he says that he thinks that there are a sufficient number of Republicans that would support this. And of course, he's hopeful that a couple of Democrats would be on board as well. Now, he did specify that he has not yet spoken directly with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell about this particular bill, but he says he has spoken to a few of his other colleagues. But mainly the tactic here is to ignite more public discussion around this issue. Senator Graham mentioned this point. We also heard this point from the president of March for Life just after that conference. So let's listen to what they had to say.
Right now, 28 states in the country have unlimited abortion, and so this will work towards a common sense law in those states to enact limitations.
We're trying to pick a position we think will rally the country to be more sympathetic to the unborn child.
Democrats were quick to condemn Graham's proposal, the White House releasing a statement calling ideas like this, quote, continued radical steps by elected Republicans.
Proposals like the one today send a clear message from MAGA Republicans to women across the country. Your body, our choice.
But could this bill be taken up in a Republican majority? Leadership today downplayed that possibility.
In terms of scheduling, I think most of the members of my conference prefer that this be dealt with at the state level.
This contrasts with his previous comments on the issue. Just a couple of months ago, McConnell said a national ban on abortion was, quote, possible. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
NTD's Melina Wisecup reporting. And with that in mind, midterms are now just 8 weeks away. Tonight, the last primaries are wrapping up with elections in Rhode Island and New Hampshire. A key race to watch tonight is New Hampshire's U.S. Senate race. Democrat Senator Maggie Hassan is up for re-election. Last time she was on the ballot, she won narrowly against her Republican opponent.